Well, Uwe, it's been a long time since we go when we first started out at the Hick Building and places like that.
Yes, it has.
I want to start this interview with you and take you back as far as you want to, and you particularly were the son of one of the German scientists who came over here. Tell us about your first entry into Huntsville.
Well, I'll go ahead and start back from Germany and bring myself to Huntsville on
that's even better.
a short description here. Yeah, I was born in Swinemünde, which is about 30 kilometers east of Peenemünde. And my dad at that time was at Peenemünde. And from there, after the war was coming to a close, we migrated to south into Bavaria at a place called Landshut, which is about 70 kilometers east of northeast of Munich in Bavaria, and lived there for from about 45 to 47. In 45, when we moved to Landshut, the husbands, or my father and the rest of the men, came over to the United States, to White Sands, and they stayed here for 2 years while the family stayed back in Landshut.
And we would like to, we know that was the case, but we would like to know some more about that. What all was happening there?
Well, I was just starting school at the time before I left Germany, and one of the customs is when you start school, they give you what they call Zuckertüte, which is a inverted cone filled full of candy, which is a big deal for a small kid at the time. Especially at that time, during the war, there wasn't very much candy around, and so that is something you remember, kind of. But, as a child there, we played, and it was, I enjoyed it. I remember it as a fairly good time. My grandfather was living there also, on my mother's side, and there was a river called the Weser, which we played in, and but from a kid's perspective, I went back after being over here and working on the Space Lab program at the time, so I went back to Munich in the late 70s. I thought I remembered the place. Well, when I got into the town, I recognized nothing in the town. And what was curious to me is there was a big castle up on the hill, which you'd think I would have observed. But I guess as a child, when you're about 4 feet high, your horizon is pretty limited in the sense of what you view and what you don't. And but it was an experience that kind of floored me, that I didn't remember some of the main monuments and places in the place I'd lived in for 2 years. But anyway, in 1947. We went to Bremerhaven and took a troop ship, over to New York City. And from there, we went by train to El Paso. I don't remember much about the train ride. I remember vividly the trip over on the troop ship. I was sick, though, seasick the whole time. I have not been on a ship since then. It was one of these main experiences in life,
No Mediterranean cruises for you?
Right, nope. And no, I was sick as a dog most of the time coming over on the ship. But we did land in New York City and took the train down, and that's all kind of a blur to me in the sense of how long the trip took and those kind of things. But we landed in El Paso in a place called Fort Bliss, which was an Army base. And they had a special place for us on the Army base. It was basically a fenced-in area where all the Germans stayed. They brought the guys the men from the White Sands, and the families lived there in converted barracks. And we lived there from 47 came to Huntsville in 1950. My experience in El Paso was very positive. Loved the place as a kid.
Did you go to school there?
I went to school there and went through the, I guess, the lower fourth. And but as far as, it was kind of a different terrain from Bavaria. As far as the desert goes, you know, we hadn't seen all that kind of stuff, lizards and desert, and the other challenge we had was we were supposed to stay within the stockade, and we constantly snuck under the fence and went out in the desert and played, and then the MP would, you know, parents would say, well, my kid's gone, and they'd call the MP, and they'd come out and look for us, and pick us up and take us back into the compound. You know, we'd go off the reservation every once in a while, so to speak. But, okay, from there, in 1950, when they decided to move the whole program up here to Huntsville, to Redstone, we drove up here, and in fact, at that time in 1950, a hurricane was chasing us along the coast, Galveston and stuff like that, so we're just always a little bit ahead of the hurricane as we're traveling up, and the trip itself was no major event, I guess. As a kid, one is pretty resilient, you know, moving from place to place. You think after a while you get traumatized by it, but I don't know, it was kind of another experience in life, and we kind of took it that way. And our reception here in Huntsville when we came here was, well, the first year I went through I went through three schools in the first year. And the reason for it was when we first moved here, there was very limited housing. And so the first house that we stayed in was on Ridgecrest, now called Drake, which was in the sort of textile area up there where they had the mills. And so we lived there for a couple of months, and then they found a better place, and so we moved to a place called Harrison Avenue, and then we moved to Locust Street, and then eventually my parents acquired enough money to buy land. Well, they bought the land, actually. They bought the land before they even came to Huntsville, come to think of it. The men had made a trip up here, and they staked out some property and bought, where I ended up living was on Locust Street.
I know it well.
Yeah. And
I live now about 2 blocks from that.
Okay. And it's right at the end of Locust. At that time, the city was so small that we were living actually in the country. The city limit ended right the block before.
That's right.
And so the schools we were supposed to go to at that time was Rising for elementary, which was way out of the way. It's up there in Oakwood. And but since I'd already been in, I went from Joe Bradley when I lived out there on Drake to Fifth Avenue School, which is now gone. They've torn that down on Governor's Drive. And then I went to East Clinton, and
which is still there.
Which is still there, yeah. So all that moving was done in the first year, and then my parents started building the house at the end of Locust Street. We lived on the front end of Locust Street, and it was at that time a newer section. It was sort of the second, third. There was a third block off of California Street, and some of those houses had just been built, and so they found that place and rented it. And we lived there several years till the house got built, and then we moved at the end of Locust Street on what I think once was referred to as Crowd Hill in one of the magazines.
That was a term, yeah. And I might add that at this time, those houses are still appreciating over there.
Yes, they are. And in fact, Von Braun, for instance, he lived right behind us at that time. His first house before he moved up on Big Cove was right behind us, and so we had some interactions. Myself and a friend would cut his grass every so often, so that's my claim to fame, is having cut the grass for Von Braun at one point in my life. And but from there, I went through the whole school system in Huntsville. The reception, as far as the people goes, the interaction was pretty seamless. I was somewhat surprised. I mean, considering the war has just been over about 5 years, and it was probably one of the reasons they kept us in the enclosure in Fort Bliss, was to protect ourselves.
It was either to keep you in or others out.
Yeah, it's one of the two. But no, the reception here in Huntsville, I had no problems integrating with the people, and everybody seemed to be very friendly, and so we didn't have any any problems interacting with the Southern folks at that time, with a bunch of Germans that came landing in here, you know, and which were probably on the same level as Yankees moving in the South at that time.
Oh, no.
Or even worse.
No. You were much better.
Oh, were we? Well, I didn't realize that. But anyway, no, I went through the school system, went to Huntsville Junior High, the old one first, and after I got out of East Clinton. It used to be on the hill up there at the off of White Street, which is now torn down. And then I went to Junior High, which is the Arts Center, the old Huntsville High School. Yep. And then I went to the new Huntsville High School, which is now gone too, since they've rebuilt it, and graduated in 1958. Mm-hmm. And from there, I went to the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. Mm-hmm. Spent about 3.5 years there. Mm-hmm. And during this, well, when I graduated from high school, I worked that summer at Brown Engineering. Mm-hmm. At the Hick Building at that time. Mm-hmm. And
I think that's where I first met you.
Was it? I was working as a well, I'm not sure. It was in the inspection shop, okay. Yeah. And being old greenhorn, you know, I had to do a lot of getting tools and this kind of stuff from the tool crib. And one of the jokes, of course, these old seasoned guys would play jokes on me, you know, and one of the things they did one time, they said, "Hey, Uwe, would you mind going out there and getting a left-handed screwdriver?" And I fell for it. I just walked out there and asked him. The guy, he just cracked up, you know, of course. So, you know, that was my first experience in that kind of a world. And
construction humor.
Yes, yes. And so at the end of that summer, I went to Tuscaloosa and majored in mechanical engineering. Mm-hmm. Went through the school there.
A good choice.
And every summer, I worked at NASA for 3 months. And what I did is, the path I followed through was I worked one summer in Fritz Vanderzee's shop, mm-hmm. going through the machine shop, the welding shop, and the sheet metal shop. So about a month in each one of them. And then the next summer, I was out on the test stand, the 1B test stand, as a mechanic working in the boat tail up there, and had my first experience with what you might call exciting times with explosions. They were filling the LOX doers at the bottom of the test stand. We were up in the boat tail of the S1B, and all of a sudden this tremendous explosion happened. And so everybody headed down to the, you know, down the stairwell. I mean, you weren't even touching the stairwell. You were just kind of sliding down the banisters on your hands, you know. And it turned out, what it turned out was the LOX tank, the filter to the LOX tank blew because it was contaminated. Mm-hmm. The guy that was doing the tanking, luckily, lived through it. He probably was a little deaf from it, but so, you know, nobody really got hurt bad on it. But that was my first experience that, you know, this business can get dangerous out there. Mm-hmm. And but as a mechanic out there, I enjoyed, you know, working with the mechanics out there and learning the systems and stuff like that. And so at the end of that summer, I went back to school, and then the following summer, I went out to, I worked the summer at McDonnell Douglas, mm-hmm. again for a guy named Gordon Stoops in the Saturn integration office, or Saturn Systems office, I believe was the name of the office. He was a resident manager out there. Mm-hmm. And so they had me sort of following the S4B development mm-hmm. out there at that time. And so I did that summer, which was really neat. I mean, it was my first time in California, and I really enjoyed that. Mm-hmm. You know, single guy in California, living in Santa Monica was a good time that summer.
Hard duty.
Yeah, hard duty. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And okay, from there, I went back to school. I graduated, came back to Huntsville. When I graduated from high school, I said, I'm not going to come back to Huntsville, mm-hmm. small town. I want to see the big city, you know. But something attracted me back to Huntsville, and I ended up working in test lab, my mm-hmm. first job. And I was working for a guy named Fritz Kramer. I don't know whether you knew him, Bob, or not.
I don't remember.
Okay. But what we worked on then was, at that time, they were getting ready to start the Saturn V testing. And they were really worried after the Saturn 1B testing about the noise levels and people complaining that they were worried about the windows breaking and stuff like that in the residence around here. So Fritz Kramer was working on a system called sound suppression system to reduce the noise level. Basically what he was doing, he was having the exhaust plumes ingest water to slow the velocity down to reduce the noise level, and then he'd take the water back out because we're talking about huge quantities of water. Okay, so it was kind of a siphon system, and then was a centrifugal system that slung the water back out, and you recapture it and feed it back to the inlet. But it turned out we never needed. But we did build about, I don't know, I would say it was probably on the scale, it must have been about a 20% scale or something like that. And we did that in the old jump stand out there. That historic stand is where we had it. And so that allowed me to, during that time at Test Lab, when I got to be able to build the whole, not build, but go through the process of designing the pressurization system for, because we had the 5 engines. They were GE engines. We bought smaller engines, and we had to design all the feed systems and everything else in the pressurization system. So that's when I went back to the Hick building. They thought it'd be a good experience for me to go through the design process of the pressurization system with, back then it was Charlie Wood and those guys, and that's probably where I really ran into.
That's where we met,
Yeah.
Charlie Wood.
And Jim Moses.
Jim Moses.
He's the one that I was working under at that time, okay?
Right.
And there was Max Nine and
Max Nine,
Dave
Jerry
Arnett
Vanneman.
and Jerry Vanneman, yeah, all those guys in the Hick building. And so I stayed out there with those guys doing the pressurization system design, and then came back, and then we built the system and did actually some testing on it. And so then we did a few more things, but about that time I decided, I kind of like the analytical side of things. And so I talked to, I was trying to think how that worked. I guess because of my connection to the Hick building with that group, I came back and worked in Charlie Wood's organization for Jerry Vanneman at that time, and George Hobson. They were both sitting in one room at that time over in 4610. And so
I was in there too.
Yeah. And so from there, we started working on the, what they called at that time, the wet workshop, later called Skylab. We went to Skylab and the orbital workshop, and Skylab was finally the name of it. And but the part that I was working on was the thermal design of the Apollo telescope mount, the container ATM, actually the thermal control on the for the solar telescopes. And I did that stayed with that till almost, all the way through flying, which was kind of exciting when the thing lifted off and lost the shield, meteoroid shield. That was kind of a panic situation at that time. And so I went through that, and all the way through the mission. And from there I moved on to Space Lab, worked on Space Lab for about 7 years. And after Space Lab in about 81, I moved from there into program development, and headed up the, under Frank Swally, Frank, and headed up the thermal and structures branch in program development on that, and worked there for about 2 years. One thing I left out is on Space Lab, what my main role was, I was sort of the subsystem manager for ECLSS and thermal control system. So I had about 7 years experience in ECLSS. And so space station was starting up at that time, so Luther had asked me, Luther Powell at that time asked me to come up to the space station program office, which I did eventually. There was a couple of years between the first discussion and time I finally got up there. But I worked up there for a couple of years, and after about the, I don't know how many redesigns we went through, but after about the third or fourth one, I got a little bit tired of it, and I said, you know, we're never going to get to hardware stage the way we're going. And it kept dragging out, and so I ended up going back to program development and working in the launch vehicle side of future programs. And been in that side of the house most of my life since, and when that happened in about '88 is when I left the programs. I was with the space station about 2.5 years. And from there, I went through a lot of different programs. NGL, well, first was a heavy lift launch vehicle program. It ended up not making actually a hardware program out of it. And then I got involved into the air breathing part of the system, which was new to me and which was really interesting, the ramjet scramjets. And so we started testing what they called a rocket-based combined cycle, which was a combination of a ram scramjet with injectors, rocket injectors in, that allows you to start off. It's a one integrated engine with rockets embedded in it that allowed you to take off, get you up to speed, and then you convert over to an air-breathing engine. And then the final phase of getting into orbit, of course, you go back to the rocket. And the whole aeronautics part of it was something that I'd kind of missed my whole career, and I found it extremely interesting. And we did a lot of testing in wind tunnels up at a place called Gassel. It's on Long Island, New York, and it was a real it was a technology program, but it was really enjoyable in the sense it was a completely new world, and it was something totally different from what I'd been doing for the last, 20, 30 years. And
well, Odie, as you know, in that time, we moved from the slide rule to the computer.
Yeah. In fact, speaking of that, I remember sitting on the console on Skylab when it first started off, and I had a little TI calculator. It didn't have a square root function. Didn't have a square root function, the one I had, and nowadays what you get, now you have these beautiful desktop or laptop computers that do just marvelous things. So it's come a long way. And so anyway, I went through that and went part of the NGLT. That was part of the ASTP. NGLT ASTP was the Advanced Space Transportation Program, and then it switched to NGLT, which was the what does the N stand for again? New Generation Launch Technology. And worked in that till I retired from NASA, which was in 2004. I retired in January, on the 3rd of January in 2004, and took a Saturday and Sunday off and went back to work on the 5th for SAIC, and been there ever since. So that's kind of where I've gone, what I've been through.
Well, that was certainly, in my opinion, you went through the exciting parts, as in having to run down the stairs in the test lab and all of those things, and the computational slide rule went away and computer programs came in. What are your thoughts relative to the shift from extensive testing into analytically studying things?
Well, I think it went way too far in the history of Marshall, personally. Back in the 60s, there was a lot of doing, very little studying. I mean, the studies were going on, but it was mostly building hardware, testing, breaking it, and testing some more. Then it got to the phase of paper studies for way too long, way too long. And in the meanwhile, from about the mid-'70s to the late '80s, the hiring almost stopped too. So you start developing a gap between the young guys and the old guys. One time I used to be one of the youngest guys on the center, and I find myself now the oldest, one of the oldest ones out there. But there was a gap developed in the workforce that because of just a lack of hiring new people, and so that had to be overcome. And then the new people that came in, from about after the shuttle and Space Lab, I mean, there was a time of about, 15 years or more that programs got started and stopped, and you never really got into the hardware phase. And a lot of people that grew up ended up being more in the program management area or in the preliminary design area, and they never had the opportunity to experience going through a program from sort of cradle to grave in the sense of, from a concept to seeing the hardware fly, which is really satisfying.
You're telling me what I was asking you to. That's great. Right. You had the unique benefit of doing some of those things in the old way as well as today what we can do.
Yeah.
I envy you.
Well, it was, from my perspective, it was a better time when you were doing that, when you got your hands dirty and got to do a lot of that kind of stuff, and as opposed to the paper. I mean, I enjoy both. In fact, most of my career was mostly paper, except for some of the testing we did, and we didn't build the hardware, of course, it was contracted out. We just kind of followed the testing and that kind of thing, whereas, I mean, the ATM was built in-house. So, we got to go out and kick on the hardware and everything else and find all the warts and everything else between what the design should have been and what they actually assembled. So, you learn a lot when you go through that whole process, and from initial concept all the way to actually building the hardware and then testing it. And we took the ATM down in Sunspot in 4619, and then we took it down to Chamber A at Houston and did a lot of vacuum chamber testing. And that's an experience a lot of people have missed out on. And it's something I miss also, even today. When I get around test facilities and stuff like that, I kind of enjoy it.
I had some unique experiences of going back down to the Mississippi test facility that we did all of our Saturn tests on after I retired and was at SAIC. And surprisingly enough, several people remembered what we had done there. But that was an all-test effort. But I have to think that testing prevented an awful lot of failures.
Oh, yeah. It found a lot of weakness in the design, so to speak, that could be corrected before flight.
These are things, little simple things that truly the analytical thing was too big to get to.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, on ATM we found things like we had thermal standoffs, let's say, between the optical instrument and what we called the spar, which was sort of the optical bench that the instrument sat on. And we wanted to make sure that thing didn't warp to keep the instruments aligned. And so we had titanium washers stacked. Well, during the assembly process, some of those were missing, and so these are the kind of things, even though the design said to put them there, when you finally assemble it, you find that humans do make mistakes every once in a while, and that's all part of the learning experience. So it's kind of satisfying to be part of that.
What all are you doing now that you're retired out at the NASA place?
Well, I'm supporting a couple of different agencies. One of them, of course, is out at Marshall, and I'm supporting the Ares 1 program. A couple of areas I'm working on is the technology assessment of all of the hardware. So we're trying, because the program requires at certain major milestones to do a technology assessment, so we're trying to develop a method that is a little more consistent than the voting in a bunch of guys sitting around the table, and experience-based, saying, okay, this is what it ought to be, and the guy normally with the strongest personality is the one that gets his way on the TRL level, and so we were trying to normalize this thing a little bit, because on programs that are long in duration, sort of like like the exploration program, people come and go, and you'd like to keep some consistency in the way you measure things. And so we've developed a kind of a tool which was a takeoff from an Air Force tool of trying to do that. And I'm in the process right now of benchmarking that tool with some of the projects out at Marshall. And that's one area I'm doing. The other area I'm following is all the facility activity that's required for the Ares 1 launch vehicle. And that's sort of the Marshall part of it. And then I'm also working on an Air Force contract up at AFRL in Dayton, and we're working on fully reusable launch systems also. It's it's a technology program. It's not an operational program, but it deals with operational responsive systems from a launch vehicle point of view, and so we're looking at what kind of technologies we need to develop and test to bring it closer to building a vehicle along the way at some point. And so I'm involved in that activity. And then I consult a little bit with the Army at a very low level, but and that's about what I do sort of in my day-to-day activity now.
Well, that sounds like a very interesting lifestyle, but your experiences, your history, it covers the entire practical parts of rocketry and space exploration, and that's a unique thing to have. What you have any really thoughts that you want to leave for the future generation?
Boy, that's a really good question.
This is how we close.
Yes. Well, I'll say something that an advice my dad gave me when I got out of college.
That's what I'm looking for.
And I thought it was very good advice. When I got out of school, I'd mentioned that I'd worked at McDonnell Douglas in the Saturn Systems office up there. They'd asked me to come back to work for them. My dad says, no, he says, you know, what you really need is get some experience under your belt first. He says, you ought to spend about 10 years in the labs, get your hands dirty, go through the design, the testing, and that kind of stuff. And then if you still feel like the project office is where you want to go, that's where you ought to go then, you know. He says, you can never go from the project office into engineering. You can always go from engineering to the project office, and if you don't like it, you can come back. So it gives you sort of a choice in life, okay? I thought it was very good advice. I ended up spending 20 years in the labs before I left, so apparently I really liked it pretty much before I got out of S&E at that time, Science and Engineering, and I've enjoyed the other side of it too. It's exciting in a different way. But
yeah, but you paid your dues to get there.
Yeah. So if, you know, a young guy getting out, I would say it'd be better to first get your hands dirty, get some experience, and then if you want to become a program manager, fine. At least you can do that with an experience base behind you. You know of what you're doing, in the sense of a person that comes in and does a paper study and never gets in the hardware side of things. It's a lot harder then to be a manager in the sense of, you know, of working programs without that technical background. So I thought that was good advice. I took it, and I haven't regretted it since.
Well, you're passing it on to the next generation here, so I think that's a great approach. Is there anything else that you would like to personally leave with us?
No, I think the space business is exciting. Even after so many years, I mean, I spent almost 42 years at NASA. It still excites me. I find it very interesting. I think it's a great area to go into. It seems that the exploration program is picking up now, you know, that there's a future. There's a lot of activity going on out at Marshall now in the sense of testing and hardware starting to be built, and that kind of stuff. It's getting away from the view graphs and those kind of things, and
Right.
the PowerPoint presentations, and actually, seeing some real stuff now, and so that's good. So I think if the exploration program continues on, I think there's a lot of opportunity for young engineers and other people to, find a satisfying place in life, to work. So I'd highly recommend it. It's been a good run for me.
Well, we certainly appreciate your being here, and we would appreciate your help in getting others like that. There are other people that grew up with us there that can carry some message. So you can be our bearer of good tidings.
I'll do that.